Here we go. It's one of my favorite segments of the week. The weekly betting lines and the edge given by Steve Merrill at Pro Sports Info. Join him right there. ProSportsInfo.com. It's just not college football, but the NFL, the NBA, and the World Series as well, as you can check out his information and insight, as it's obvious to hear each and every week here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Steve, how you doing today?
Hey, Mark, doing well.
We got three tremendous games on tap for college football fans this week. Wisconsin loses at Illinois last week. They take on Ohio State. Before we get to that, if you can put some kind of perspective on Wisconsin losing at Illinois, the Badgers being so dominant against everyone thus far this year. They go to Illinois as a 31-point favorite. They lose outright. We also had a Miami team hosting Georgia Tech, a team that had lost to the Citadel and really didn't have any impressive performances. Their only win, Georgia Tech coming in at 1-5, was against South Florida by 4 points. They beat Miami as an 18-point dog. Do you have any criteria, numbers, anything that shows you that there are more upsets this year or more significant point spread upsets than there typically are?
Well, it's ironic because, we've talked about many weeks this year how the lines in general are sharper than they've ever been. We'll see these 34-point favorites winning by 35 points. It's amazing how close a lot of these games fall within, 1 or 2 points of the spread. And I think that's more so than ever. Yet, in the same breath, you probably could say there's some more double-digit dogs winning outright than ever. We touched on the main reason a couple weeks ago here on the show. First of all, the offenses, even at the lower-level teams, are explosive. It's all pass-based now. And it's not like 20, 30 years ago when everybody was running the football. You got up by 20 points. It was nearly impossible to come from behind. We're not seeing these service academies pulling 20-point comebacks. These are teams that can throw the ball. And Georgia Tech's a really interesting case study because they're a team that's had that triple option for several years. They're now switching to a more conventional pro-style attack with the new coach this year. And they obviously struggled out of the gate. But at some point, teams get better in October and November. So maybe that was the buy sign we needed to see for Georgia Tech. Keep in mind, Miami just a couple weeks ago lost as a 14-point home favorite to Virginia Tech, and now they lose as an 18-point favorite at home just a couple weeks later. So they've been a real Jekyll and Hyde team, obviously, and the ACC in general this year has really been down a notch. You look at all those non-conference losses they've had. You transition over to that Illinois-Wisconsin game. That was obviously a shocker. I don't think anybody saw them losing that game outright. You can make an argument, well, it was a look-ahead spot for Wisconsin. They had this huge game against Ohio State on deck. We all realize that. Keep in mind also, it was coming off the big Michigan State win, but it's hard to believe you can beat a Michigan State team 38-0 and then lose to Illinois. And what's amazing about Illinois is, you remember a few weeks ago, I played against them here with Minnesota, an easy blowout winner. And one of the things I liked about that was that Illinois did not throw the ball well, and it's very difficult for teams to play from behind, but Illinois didn't really have to do that in that game. They were able to keep it close. They ran for 141 yards. They only threw for 174. So once again, they did not throw the ball well, but they had a 3-1 turnover edge. And in both college and pro football, turnovers often dictate the outcome. But that was a terrible scheduling spot for Wisconsin, sandwiched between the two games. But still, no excuse to lose outright as over a 4-touchdown favorite.
Got Steve Merrill on the line. He shakes down the betting odds on the major games for us each and every week. So please join him at prosportsinfo.com, where you will get some tremendous insight and his services there on Major League Baseball with the World Series, the NBA, of course, coming up very soon, and the NFL as well. So Wisconsin's got a rebound, and they've got a rebound against the team that might be playing better football than anybody in the country. Ohio State has had huge lines, and they've been covering them against the likes of Nebraska and Michigan State in recent weeks, and against Northwestern as a 28-point favorite. They win by 49 points. The Buckeyes are a 14-point favorite at home against Wisconsin.
Yeah, normally, when you have a team that's allowing just 7.5 points a game, just 3.5 yards per play like Wisconsin, it's pretty tempting to take that full 14 points. And I do think this line is definitely inflated, obviously, based on last week's loss at Illinois. By the way, this line has started to touch 14.5 in some spots. So I think if you like Ohio State, you probably want to lock in the -14 early in the week. If you like Wisconsin, definitely wait to get a 14.5, as I do think more of them will appear later in the week and the weekend. At 14.5 or more, it's got some value with Wisconsin in this game. One angle up this year is taking underdog points, and they allow this point of the season, and almost everyone of them has failed to cover. It's really been remarkable. You look at last week, Northwestern was in that spot. They're a team getting 26 points at home, and they only allowed 20 on the season. They lose 52-3. But I think Wisconsin's still one of the best teams in the country. Now, for many years, one of the best angles was playing against teams that lost their first game after a 5-0 or better start. And the reason is because it was often a huge letdown after that. Now, with the national title picture the way it is, a one-loss team knows they still have a chance. Even though that was a bad loss, Wisconsin realizes if they run the table, win this game especially, they're back in the mix. So I would expect them to show up here, and I still think they're one of the best defensive teams in the country. So to get 14.5 or more with the team that's allowing just 7.5 points per game is pretty tempting.
Got one of the great traditional rivalries in Ann Arbor, with Michigan hosting Notre Dame, which is kind of strange in that Notre Dame's playing for everything as a one-loss team that had a quote-unquote good loss at Georgia in staying within a score. Michigan, on the other hand, basically blew hits not just college football playoff chances, but most likely it's going to be difficult for them to win a Big Ten championship regardless of what they do, with 2 losses in the conference now. And so it's a huge game in terms of national exposure, the brand names, and everything else. Notre Dame playing for everything. Michigan, in a sense, playing for pride because they've got nothing on the line in terms of championships. And it's only a 1-point Michigan spread at home.
Yeah, and you look at the scheduling setup here, tremendous edge for Notre Dame in the scheduling aspect of this. First of all, they're coming off a bye week, so I think that's a big edge at this point of the season. But then I also just mentioned how teams often have a letdown after that first loss of the year. That doesn't work as much now because the way the playoff system is, 4 teams get in. We saw Michigan bounce back after that loss against Wisconsin a few weeks ago, 52-0 win against Rutgers. I actually had a best bet on Michigan in that game for my clients, minus 27 against a really bad Rutgers squad. Michigan won 3 straight, but once again, they struggled once again under Harbaugh against a highly ranked opponent last week. Down big early in that game. They did fight back, only lost by 7, but they still came up short. You just got to wonder, as you're saying, Mark, is there a letdown this week? And then you factor in the fact Notre Dame has the bye. They have extra prep time. They've been the better offensive team this year, too. These are 2 good defensive teams. In fact, statistically, Michigan's been the better defensive team this year when you factor in opponents played, but they've been a very average offensive team, whereas Notre Dame's been very good running and throwing the ball, 39 points a game. Michigan averages only 29. So I think the offensive edge for Notre Dame and the scheduling situation probably gives them a slight edge, yet they're still a +1 underdog.
And you got to figure maybe Michigan's really let down, considering that they came all the way back from 21-0 down, had to drop pass in the end zone that would have tied the game, and they faced that whiteout at Penn State, one of the more difficult places to play, and really put on a valiant comeback in the second half, and then they let it all go down the drain. 2 losses in the Big Ten. They probably can't win a championship now. We're at the point of the year, obviously, Steve, where especially in the SEC, the top teams start knocking heads every week. And one of the games that we look forward to each and every year is the Tigers and Tigers, LSU and Auburn, this time in Death Valley. The script was flipped last year, in which Auburn was a substantial favorite. Joe Burrow and company went in there and won on the Plains. This time, LSU, with their explosive offense, a big favorite at 10.5 points over an Auburn team that is fighting through one of the more difficult schedules in the country.
Yeah, and I think, Auburn's one loss this year at Florida a couple of weeks ago, actually 3 weeks ago, is actually not going to look like a bad loss when all is said and done as well. So they're still in the national title mix. They need to win this game, though. They fully realize that. They get Georgia at home in a few weeks. So Auburn does still control their own destiny. LSU obviously does as well, undefeated on the season. These have been 2 of the biggest moneymakers in college football. Combined, these 2 teams are 11-2 against the point spread this year. Just been fantastic moneymakers against the spread, 2 of the best in the country. And it makes it a difficult call for that reason. When you have 2 really good point spread teams, I think you start leaning towards the team getting double digits here, and that would be Auburn in this spot. They're a very balanced offensive attack. The concern, of course, is a true freshman quarterback once again in a hostile road game. LSU is probably the more consistent passing attack here. But I think Auburn has the much better pass defense. This is a team that's allowing just 17 points a game. LSU is actually allowing 20, yet we're getting double digits with Auburn here. So this one, I think, goes down to the wire. I like LSU to win this game, but Auburn, this is another one of those double-digit dogs that could definitely pull the outright upset.
Steve Merrill, Pro Sports Info. Please check out his work right there, prosportsinfo.com. And I'm always curious to find where Steve will go across the nation to find a good value selection. Steve, what do you have for us this week?
Yeah, I mentioned, a few weeks ago we played against Rutgers. I came back with Michigan after they got embarrassed at Wisconsin. Used Michigan minus 4 touchdowns. They won 52-0. This is a really bad Rutgers squad. But with that said, Boy, did it catch my attention when I saw Rutgers as a full touchdown home dog this week against Liberty, a team that was a 1AA school just a few years ago. And not only did Rutgers open as a 6.5-point dog, it's now up to 7.5. Now, this very well might not be a best bet for my clients because I don't like using really bad teams and just hoping they cover. But I just had to talk about this game here in the show today, Mark, because how crazy is it to see a Big Ten home underdog getting 7.5 points against Liberty? Now, Liberty has won 5 straight after losing their first 2 games, but keep in mind they lost 24-0 at Syracuse in the opener. They lost by 21 at Louisiana Lafayette in the second week, and they've basically played cupcakes since then. They beat Buffalo, who's really down a notch, Hampton, New Mexico State, and then Maine last week. And Maine is a mediocre 1AA team this year, and Liberty still allowed 44 points in that game. I know Rutgers is awful, but they also realize a very winnable game for them. And keep in mind, after they have lost 6 straight, both straight up against the spread, but they beat Massachusetts 48-21 back in week 1 as a 17-point favorite. I think Rutgers will be very glad to play a weaker non-conference opponent this week. And although their stats are terrible this season, I still don't see how Liberty can be a 7.5-point road favorite against any Big Ten opponent. So we'll take a look at Rutgers. We'll hold your nose. But I don't even think it's one of those situations you're having to hope they cover. I think they win the game outright.
Yeah, it's a very interesting play right there because Rutgers, again, against much, much better competition, has been so inept. I pointed people to an Indiana game they played a few weeks ago that they lost 35-0. They completed 5 passes in the game for 1 yard. It's just historic how bad they've been in the Big Ten for the past few years. They're just getting their brains beat out week after week after week after week. But they get a bit of a reprieve and don't face near the talent that they're used to facing week in, week out. For some reason, this Colorado USC game is kind of popping out at me. The Buffaloes had played very well early in the season, beat Nebraska, beat Arizona State by 2 scores, got their brains beat out the last 2 weeks against Oregon and Washington State the last 2 weeks. But they're at home against USC on a Friday night. They're getting 13 points. I don't know. It's with a USC team that plays much better at home, have yet to win a road game this week. So I'm kind of looking at that one myself.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you always have the altitude factor. It's something I use more in college basketball when handicapping. But one angle I love in college basketball, and it translates a little bit in football as well, is these California West Coast schools that have to go to Colorado State. You get the same thing back in the day with the WAC. You get Fresno going to Utah State, for example. So I do think Colorado has a legitimate home field advantage in this game. And as you mentioned, USC has not been a good road team this year. They're 0-3 straight up and against the spread. They're 4-0 and 3-1 ATS in their other games. So there's an extreme home road dichotomy with USC this year. And then you factor in the scheduling spot here against a Colorado team that has a legitimate home field advantage. Plus, as you said, it's a standalone Friday night national TV game. I wouldn't be surprised to see Colorado play better than they had the last 3 weeks when they've gone 0-3 straight up in ATS.
So here's the deal. You can get my weekly predictions. So it's week 9 coming up. You grab the link in the description section below, but it's much more than that. The Voice of College Football community. We've got exclusive live streams. It's about joining the community. You just get my picks. I was 14-7 against the spread last week, but if you're serious, you want to get things done, you want to do it the right way, join Steve over on prosportsinfo.com. You can hear the obvious insight here each and every week. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks, Mark.